Hello everyone. Welcome to the meetup 02 of our user group. And today we have an exciting session by Mr. Craig, who will be introducing us to navigating the compliance in the DevOps security. And then it will be me. I'll be taking you through an exciting Bicep journey on how you could get control of the environment and still make sure your developers are feeling comfortable with it. Yeah. So, Craig, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. Here, thanks, Glenn. I will take over the screen. Let's see. This one. And just need to swap this with that. Okay. So I thought actually the theme for this event was quite cool, having it as a matrix theme. So I immediately thought, okay, compliance around infrastructure as code. Oh, here, you need to mute. So I put some keywords into ChatGPT and got this title out: Navigating Compliance in Azure DevOps Security. But actually, I'm going to go into more into the Defender for Cloud bit, which we'll go into now. But before we start, who am I? My name is Craig Forshaw. I'm a cloud architect at Atea. I've been working with Microsoft Cloud Technology since 2014. I think 2014 was my first Azure deployment. So yeah, 10 years now working with Azure, Office 365, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Security. I'm an organizer as well of the Microsoft Security user group. We've got just short of 1,000 members now. So if you're interested in Microsoft Security, check that out. And I also do some blogging on Medium. I've written a few articles around Defender for DevOps recently. So yeah, what we're going to talk about, it's not actually Azure DevOps, as the title suggests. We're actually going to have a look at Azure regulatory compliance for DevOps security. So you can interpret that as Azure DevOps, but focusing on the Azure DevOps compliance part of Defender for Cloud specifically. So compliance in the infrastructure as code matrix. So my background is infrastructure. So I've naturally gone in towards infrastructure as code. But this can also be applied to anything that you do with DevOps and anything you deploy on Azure using DevOps really. How do you govern what is actually being deployed in the environment? And do you take the blue pill and assume that everything is okay and just go through your existence blissfully unaware that your environment isn't configured correctly? Or do you take the red pill and you go down the rabbit hole? So do you investigate what is actually happening on your tenant, on your multiple subscriptions if you've got a huge environment? And for example, it's quite easy to lose a lot of control over your development, what is being developed on your different subscriptions, your different landing zones, and having control over that. And so you need to then think about establishing governance policies around what is actually occurring on your environment, and then take some remediation actions that can be used to protect your cloud environment. And this is not only specific to Azure, this can also apply to AWS, Google Cloud as well. Also, yeah, if there's any questions, just pop them in the chat, and then maybe Glenn, you can interrupt and I can answer those questions. So typical compliance challenges with DevOps security. As I said, I have a big focus on infrastructure as code. So when I think about that, it's natural to think about configuration vulnerabilities. such as infrastructure as code templates. What are you actually configuring? What type of dependencies have you configured towards maybe your Terraform provider, using the right provider version, API versions in Bicep, for example, and also hard coding sensitive information. So things like secrets, passwords, API keys, all this type of thing that, it's very easy to push this out into your environment and not have any control over it. Also missing security related components, things like if you're configuring a component that as a requirement around the private endpoints, for example, network security gateway on your virtual LAN. These types of things are usually things that maybe your developer might not think about when they're deploying code into your Azure environment. And this is something that can be picked up within the Defender for Cloud tool for you to set some compliance around. Other typical issues around configuration drift, your storage encryption, your state file if you're using Terraform, and then any kind of out of band changes that have occurred, maybe outside of your normal deployment method with infrastructure as code and DevOps, is being able to pick those up as well. And the whole security control enforcement piece around that, Azure is an evolving landscape, and so is the security space. So there's new threats that come in all the time. You need to can keep yourself continuously updated. It can be quite overwhelming. So it's really important to have a good tool that can help pick up these issues, identify them, and then if you implement a good governance framework around this, then it's going to make your life a lot easier to be able to identify and remediate these issues. A lot of organizations also struggle around validating their compliance on Azure. How do you assign tasks? How do you measure success? And how do you implement automation around it to make sure that things are done quickly and effectively, and the right people get the right messages at the right time? Also, logging and tracking of changes, reporting, that type of thing. You want to be able to quickly get a good picture of what is happening out there on your Azure environment, and then being able to take action based on the reporting. So Microsoft has some compliance frameworks for DevOps. So the first one to mention is probably one that most people know on the call, the Cloud Adoption Framework. So within the Cloud Adoption Framework, there's a security strategy. It also contains the Microsoft Cyber Security Reference Architecture. So that's kind of a really good starting point when it comes to looking at your security setup and making sure that you've got the right tools in place. And then the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, that's actually what we're going to be diving into in this session, because this is directly related to the compliance features on Defender for Cloud. And the security benchmark has a lot of architectural guidance that you can use for then using that as a basis for your governance. And the other framework that's worth mentioning, I'm not going to really go into this detail into this call, is the Microsoft Security Development Lifecycle. So this is actually a guideline practice that's been established way back in the early 2000s from Microsoft, because this is really built around application developers. But there's some really good guidance around threat modeling and actually building up a really secure DevSecOps process, which is also something that you need to take into consideration as well within the infrastructure space. So the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. So this is a best practice recommendation for workloads, data and services on Azure, but also covers AWS guidance, Google Cloud Platform guidance, and those metrics will actually appear also within Defender for Cloud. So Defender for Cloud's got quite powerful capability there that you can do this multi-cloud governance and have it in a single console. You need a Defender for Cloud CSPM license. So within that license is a security governance part of it, which will then enable these kind of security governance features within Defender for Cloud. And there's also a Purview integration that's available, which is going to take the data then and from your Defender for Cloud platform and then actually present that within Purview as well. The MCSB controls have cover quite a wide range of security areas. So network, identity management, all the main ones, privileged access, data protection, asset management. And in each of these controls, you get a series of recommendations that Microsoft provides that you can use as a guideline to then implement your environment in the correct way. But for this session, I obviously highlighted the DevOps security because that's the area of focus that I'm going to dive into. But we can also see within when I do the demo that there's some other controls there that you can actually use as well that are outside the DevOps world, but directly affect your Azure environment and then other things as well. So within the Defender for Cloud security control for DevOps security, there's 7 security controls. So the first one is threat modeling, how you're going to ensure that your application or your environment is hardened against particular threats that you've got using up-to-date patches and things like that. You've got the software supply chain security, secure DevOps infrastructure, and the other controls, integrate static applications. And these controls actually live within Defender for Cloud. And some of these controls are automated and some of these controls are manual, which I can show you in the demo. The automated controls are quite good because they will actually pick out some of the elements from the configuration that you've got on your platform and then highlight them as an issue to say that this storage account, for example, doesn't have this particular security feature enabled on it that you need to then go ahead and remediate. Or you might have, for example, a GitHub repository that you've connected to your cloud environment through Defender for DevOps that maybe doesn't have secret scanning enabled. And these are the type of automated controls that are being developed that already exist within Defender for Cloud, but also are being developed because this is quite a new feature of the product. So within Defender for the Cloud is the regulatory compliance that I've mentioned, and those security controls actually live in here in this pane. So it's a really good way to get that standard overview of all of your remediation actions that you need to take based on the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. And then the onus here is you're actually going to say, instead of the security team actually going into Defender and trying to fix these issues, you can then assign these issues to your developers. It's going to remove overhead from the security team and they can actually do what they're employed to do, which is monitoring your platform and making sure that it's secure. The people who should then actually be fixing these issues are the developers primarily, and they should hold responsibility for making sure that they conform to the compliance standards that are on Azure. To gain access to the compliance features, you need the security administrator role on the subscription level that's enabled for Defender for Cloud. So governance rules are something that you can create within the portal, and this is a really good feature that I'll show you guys. So based on remediation requirements, based on alerting, based on priority, you can then create a governance rule within Defender for Cloud and assign it to a user. And the way you can assign that is you can give the owner a due date with a time frame, and then that governance rule will then be we'll have the clock ticking to say that, okay, this person has 7, 14, 30 or 90 days to actually resolve this issue. You can then mark that as something which doesn't need to be reported in as part of your overall secure score assessment, but something that is flagged within Defender for Cloud. And then the owners will then get an email on a weekly basis, just as a reminder to say that these are the outstanding remediation actions from the governance rule that you need to take. So let's dive into the demo, and we'll configure some of the, we'll take a look at some of the actions, and we'll configure some of the governance rules. And if there's any questions, just jump in. So I have the Defender for Cloud portal open here. What you can see here is that we have the regulatory compliance controls that are showing the Microsoft Cloud Security benchmark that I've got 58 of 65 past controls. So when we hop in to regulatory compliance, here are the controls that I mentioned in the presentation, and this is actually associated to my subscription, my enterprise subscription that I have. And expanding all of these controls will show what is some of the automated assessments that Azure has produced based on the infrastructure and the code that I've deployed within my environment. So I have a lot of resource compliance status that's green, but when we come down to secure cloud services, I have a storage account here that's maybe missing a private link connection. So you can see that the tool is already just checking and reporting on that on a real-time basis. Specifically going into DevOps security, because that's the focus for this presentation. You can see here the 7 controls that I've mentioned. So for example, conducting threat modeling, you can see that this is grayed out. So the compliance control is not automated. What you would need to do here is actually follow the guidance within Microsoft's documentation. For the software supply chain, there's some automated assessments already here. So it's already checked to see if any of my connected GitHub repositories have the depend-bot scanning enabled, and there's no failed resources on that compliance check. If we go into the control details as well, we get some more information. We can also read some additional content. So coming back to that first control, which isn't automated and was grayed out, we can actually get some guidance here from Microsoft that we need to perform threat modeling to secure applications and services, secure artifacts in the CI/CD pipeline, analyze application components, and these types of things. And you get some recommendations, also some further reading from Microsoft around threat modeling, templates. Within there also, you get the AWS guidance and the GCP guidance. So that's really handy if you're running a multi-cloud environment.
Craig, could you tell about do you need to connect Defender for Cloud to these other providers?
Yeah, you do. So I can show you that very quickly. Under environment settings in Defender for Cloud, here is actually where you connect those other environments. So yeah, you've got AWS, Google Cloud. You can see also I've already got the GitHub connector and the Azure DevOps connector set up. So the connector is actually reading the repositories that I've given it access to, and then being able to make the security recommendations based on that. But if you add your AWS environment, it's going to also include those AWS recommendations and report those into the threat modeling. Well, not threat, into the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark Analysis recommendations. GitLab is the newest addition to the environment list. That I think that might still be in public preview. It may have actually come out of that the past couple of weeks since the Microsoft updated their licensing around Defender for Cloud, DevOps security specifically. So on March the 1st, it went actually over from public preview to paid, and I think GitLab followed with it. So that's the kind of first security benchmark pivot that Microsoft calls it, that I wanted to show you. That you have the capability here to get these automated assessments, and which are associated to the security benchmark, which then lives within the cloud adoption framework. So you've got from the architecture level down to the actual technical component, which is a really nice feature. If we now go over to recommendations pivot, so okay, how do I know what needs to be resolved and who's responsible for it? If we select, okay, let's see what is on time for completion. On time means that we've got a governance rule set up, and the clock is ticking to have this this governance rule resolved. If the issue goes out of time, beyond that time, then that would actually also report here within the filter, and it would show as not being compliant or being out of time. So yeah, I've got, let's see, these issues here, which are on time. If I just expand this one, I want to pick out the storage account should prevent shared key access specifically. If we go into here, I can actually see that there's 2 unhealthy resources that need to be resolved with a severity of medium. The owner is Cypher, if you remember Cypher from the Matrix movie, the IT guy. So he needs to get these resolved by the 13th of April. So he's got 30 days to actually resolve these issues. But TF state, I'm thinking this is quite an important part of the infrastructure. Maybe I want to actually assign it to someone who's a bit more senior within the team. So what you can actually go in and edit that assignment. Cypher, so in order to be able to view and edit these assignments, you need to be security admin. So there's no reason why Cypher couldn't go in as well within his login and actually reassign that himself. I'm just doing it just to save a bit of time on logging in. But what I can do is actually say, okay, let's assign it to someone who's a bit more senior. Let's give it to Morpheus. So if I just grab Morpheus's email address from Active Directory, or Entra ID even, sorry. And then I'm going to assign that to Morpheus. I'm going to keep the same remediation time frame, and then we'll apply a secure score exception until the due date. It's not going to affect your secure score at all. But I do want to make sure that it gets a reminder. So I'm going to send out the email on Monday. And then also, yeah, let's loop in his manager. Okay, so this is quite cool. So within the organization hierarchy within Entra ID and Microsoft 365, if you have the relationship to your manager within the team, it's also going to notify Morpheus's manager that this needs to be resolved. So for companies that have quite a rigid chain of command, or if you're running a development team with a head developer or you're a project manager, they can also be notified. So if we edit that, we'll update that assignment.
So you actually give him some more time to decide if you want to take the blue or the red pill?
Yeah. Exactly. So now I can see that TF state task has now been assigned to Morpheus, which is quite cool. Okay, next, let's go over to the security posture page. So here we can actually see some owners. Now this filter is quite basic in that your filter here really only shows who your owners are for your severities. So it's actually giving you basically, you can create a governance rule that is assigned based on issue severity. So what I've done in this case is I've given Neo, Morpheus, and Cypher high, low, and medium level assignments. And they can actually go in then and view that high level as well as what I can do as the overall administrator. So I can then actually see for this one, okay, these are the yeah, low level assignments for this one, and it's Neo that's been assigned these low level assignments based on that security posture recommendation. But if I was Morpheus, how would I view the portal? So let's go over to Morpheus's login and let's have a look at the security posture. Okay, we can see that here are recommendations that I need to take a look at. So these are the ones that apply to me, that are the high level issues. There we can see that new case, which we've recently changed, which has now appeared in my list. So that storage accounts should prevent shared key access is now assigned to me. Also, if I go back, if I wanted to view all the recommendations, I can also do that as a security admin, but I've also got the filter here to actually show only my recommendations as well. So there can be a case within the governance rule that isn't based on severity, but based on specific issue. And those will actually appear here as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the governance rules. So within, how do I actually create these rules then? How do I set this assignment up? Well, within environment settings in Defender for Cloud, we've got governance rules here. And here are all the governance rules that I've created. So you can see that I've created some rules around low, medium, and high severity issues. You need to assign a priority to each. So the lower the priority number, the higher the priority is. So you can see that I've got highest severity issues set as priority 1. If there's any other issues which are within these, for example, E8 infrastructure as code findings, they would also appear within the high severity issues and take priority. And the governance rule, so you can actually group recommendations and assign them to owners. You can also assign them against the resource tag. So if you are tagging a resource with owner, for example, that also contains an email address, they will also be notified that these issues, and this is quite a common thing, especially within if you're running Terraform or infrastructure as code, where you're tagging and then setting owners automatically through automation. You can then just assign this owner here instead. If I wanted to create a governance rule, let's go in and see what we can create. So if I pop back over to recommendations, and then let's see all recommendations. I want to see what actually is unassigned. What issues are there that no one has any responsibility for? Because that's an issue. Okay, so we've got one high severity issue here. Like GitHub repositories should have secret scanning enabled. Not good. And I can see that my Bicep GitHub repository needs to have code scanning enabled. We've also got one healthy resource. So TerraGoat, this repository is healthy and has the code scanning enabled, but this one is unhealthy. So in that case, then let's go ahead and create a governance rule. So yeah, as I mentioned in environment settings, then we go ahead, then we go into create a governance rule. Git, let's call it code scanning issues. I can assign it at the tenant root group or at the subscription level. So if you think about this, depending on how your teams are working, if you have multiple teams within dedicated subscriptions, then it's worth actually having this governance rule set up, maybe per individual in each team. But you could also maybe have at the tenant level, if you have multiple subscriptions and maybe one team that's working across all subscriptions. We'll give it a priority 400. Let's click next. And then we'll go in and actually look for the specific recommendation. There's the rules that I set up before, which were based on low, medium, and high severity issues. But for this one, I actually want to make sure that we look for the GitHub issue here. The GitHub repository should have code scanning enabled. Let's tick that. And then let's set the owner. Who can we give it to? Let's give it to Morpheus as well. And then here we can set our remediation time frame. So we can do 7, 14, 30, or 90 days. We'll give Morpheus 2 weeks to fix this issue because it's literally just turning on the feature within GitHub Advanced Security, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But I know he's got a lot on his plate at the moment, trying to stop people from invading Zion. So, and then we can apply the grace period, which again doesn't impact the secure score during the time frame. And then we'll go ahead and we'll create that governance rule. And then after a short period of time, that GitHub code scanning issue will then be applied to Morpheus, and then he has that now on his plate to actually remediate. I'll just see if this actually does update immediately. Let's see. Because one of the kind of issues that I've seen with this, maybe maybe like a bit of a disadvantage with the Defender for Cloud is the polling periods. So you don't really get consistent polling periods when you make changes sometimes, especially when you're making changes on some of the remote platforms like GitHub. Things are a little bit quicker when you're actually doing everything within Defender for Cloud. So if we just refresh that, and I'll show my items only. Yeah, so that's not appeared as yet. So there's a polling. So like I said, there is some polling issues around third-party connections, which don't seem to appear immediately. But eventually, that issue is actually going to land on his items list to then remediate. So yeah, final slide. Let's see. So my recommendations is that run discovery on your environment. Start in figuring out what all these alerts are on your Defender for Cloud portal, and where all the vulnerabilities lie. Then you can start mapping, okay, what alerts go to which team, and then start creating the governance rules around that, to remove the responsibility from the security team to remediate, put the onus back onto the developer or that delivery team to actually fix their problem that they've created. And then you're going to have that really good overview. And then when you implement, make sure that your alerting is in place, especially for the high value assets that you've got. The high alerting needs to be prioritized, have that lower remediation time to fix implemented, and just really establish a really good framework for how you're going to set up these governance rules and the routines associated with that. Microsoft's providing you with the tooling, but what you need to figure out is actually how you're going to implement it and have a plan for handling the rules, and then also when new issues appear, new vulnerabilities, how you can then develop those governance rules going forward. So that was my final slide. Thank you. And if there's any questions, fire away.
I have a question, Greg. Greg, sorry, the cast was not original. That's a duplicate photo. Yeah.
Yeah. This is Copilot.
I can see that.
Yeah. So if you were sharp within the presentation, I actually just used all the Copilot images based on the matrix for copyright purposes, of course. I mean, I don't know how they get away with that, but.
But that seems like more like the fourth movie, which seemed disconnected rather than the main movie picture. Yeah. I have a couple of questions. Does it support any other version control except GitHub and probably Bitbucket or Azure DevOps? If there are more than out there, do you see that?
Yeah. So at the moment, it's GitHub, Azure DevOps, and GitLab. But I'd expect more version control systems to come online. GitLab was the latest, and that was an Microsoft NDA for a while. So there are potentially other repositories coming in the future.
That's cool. When you remember when you said you could apply a grace in the security score, what do you mean? Would that part not be included in the security score, or would that be included but not accepted for that long till he replies or she replies?
Yeah, so it's not going to be reported. It's not going to drop your security score down. So if your secure score's at 80%, you can actually then remove that from the secure score, which will put it up within the grace period while it's being remediated. So the point here is for Microsoft to highlight that you've actually got now a kind of you're able to produce a report that shows that, okay, the secure score is at 80%. But we've also got these issues that we've taken out of secure score that are being remediated, that are in progress. But there's no reason why you could actually just say, no, actually, we're not going to use that feature, and we want that to report into the secure score as well.
Yeah, I think I understand that. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And yeah, pass me the Morpheus's email also. I have some questions. Anybody else have any questions?
I think so. Thank you, Craig. Really great session.
Craig. Yeah, that was lovely. I'll take the control now and let me shift on my section then. Yeah. Cool. And there we go. Okay. Now, after the fantastic session from Craig, I'm going to take you to a little bit of what he was talking about, but from the point of view of Bicep itself. So we talked a lot about how Defender can help you with these things, but I'm going to talk about how Bicep can also make use of certain features that it provides to give you more control on your governance. Bicep has a cool feature called modules. So you can create modules of your code. And I'm going to talk about that. The reason why this thing is important is because most of the time infrastructure as code fails because we assume that everybody has information of it on our estate. Every team member, every project manager has to have information of how Bicep works. We assume that certain skills are common, but they're not. This is where Bicep modules can come in handy. What you can do as an IT administrator, as an infrastructure administrator, and a security consultant, that you create Bicep modules for infrastructure that are inherently secure, that inherently have properties that can actually be exploited to make your infrastructure a bit more secure. What I present to you today is a way of deployment wherein me as an infrastructure admin would devise certain modules wherein I put in security controls and I ask for default set of questions, which could be tags, which could be other information related to the infrastructure, and I make sure that only certain values are allowed. There are 2 or 3 critical dimensions to it. First off, my modules are inherently secure because certain secure properties are already there. For example, I deploy a web app. I always make sure that the property that says HTTPS only and FTTPS only is there from the get-go, so that nobody just forgets about it. Yeah, that's one way of making sure what you deploy in your estate is always consistent, is always secure. Trying to make sure that the inherent fabric of things looks the same everywhere. Yeah. The other thing that we could do is a very common thing that sometimes is underplayed is tags. Very important stuff. As Craig mentioned, there's owner tags that could be used to assign incidents, right? And there is so much you can do with tags, with reporting, with filtering, with assigning cases, with disaster recovery, with criticality, with ownerships of who has what. It's not easy to always pinpoint who's working on which resource or which team is responsible for something. Tags, very important. And it's so much easier to get tags right up built into the information that is deployed by the templates. And it becomes ridiculously easy. Yeah. I'm going to play 2 sides here. The first side is an IT administrator who's trying to understand how to make infrastructure secure. He's a security consultant also, and that's me. So that's why So he's an administrator for infrastructure and a security consultant. These could be 2 different teams sitting in a place and deciding stuff. But right now, for simplicity, it's just one person. I go ahead and make modules, and then I compile them and put it in a container registry for the others, which is developers who are actually supposed to not have so much Bicep information. They already have too many development tools in their pocket to deal with, to make their life easier. So the first half, I'm going to be an IT administrator and security admin, and the latter half, I would be a developer who's trying to ease out his development responsibilities. Cool. What we're going to do here is that I'm going to show you first the repository that I made for being a producer. Producer is me as an IT administrator. What I do is this, yeah. What I've done basically is created a repository with a folder modules. And within that folder, for each resource that my teams use or my estate use, I've created a separate subfolder per se. And each folder has exactly one Bicep file. It could be more, but the point is that that Bicep file has the configuration that I need that should be in place for that particular resource. I'm going to go into depth about this too. The second file is a version control file, which I could expand here. Version control, this is very important because it's easier to version control when you have a major change and a minor change on your templates. A minor change is basically changing a spelling or criticality or adding one more feature. A major change could be fundamentally changing that something would not even be allowed in the properties. It depends on you how you go about it, but it gives it a fancy way to say use the version number X comma Y. It's very nice to see. And I'll show you, it looks very good too when in production, very professional. The pipeline, the Bicep file, the Bicep file is a very detailed file in which what I've done is I've taken each of the parameters that I need to be using, that I need to make sure my resource is properly governed. And I've given it two distinct features here. A proper description. Now, because we are in a governance meetup, this is exceptionally important because the developers who will be trying to use it later, they need to know what exactly is this parameter about and what kind of values are allowed. And that leads me to the second section. Every one of those parameters has two different things that's always there. One is the description. It could be a multi-line description, as you can see. And the other one is the values allowed. Now, right now, they look like text, but when we go into the editor, this would turn into an auto prompt. The same thing I do for all my parameters that are here. And if you notice closely, all these parameters here are used. Most of them are used here as tags, and some are used for something other than tags, like providing values. The most common tag that I personally advise people to have in their resources, which is much easier when you do it like this, because the Bicep template would not execute until you provide these templates, which kind of soft push for developers to do the right thing. Yeah. The tags that I advise is to have criticality and classification from the get-go, and who is the owner and what is the purpose of this. These are very important if you want to understand what kind of disaster recovery are you looking at, what kind of load are you looking at, how important your data governance need to be around these resources. Yeah. And the owners and the purpose, needless to say, is very important because most of the time, all of us have experienced where we do not know who owns the resource. Yeah. And it's so much important to know why something exists for cost and for governance. Right? Again, all the properties that you need could be predefined because these templates are available under Microsoft's documentation for Bicep web app. If I just go Bicep web app, you go to the link here. It gives you all the documentation that you need for that particular resource. You can decide what properties do you need, what properties you do not need. This is the second link, which is much more advanced. This is the first link where it gives you a quick shot of it. You can have a small template for starters. Now, this goes without saying the template doesn't need to be perfect from the day one. It could be incremental, and that's the reason the versions are there. Yeah? When you do small changes, add a minor version. When you do a major change, you add a property, you remove a property, you take out your big guns. That's major version. Yeah. And you could introduce properties as and when you go about. The best part about this is every time somebody read it, go ahead and add those properties. So the business itself is not disrupted. Very important because that's what developers are.
We have some problems with connection.
Hi there. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you now.
I'm not sure what happened, just rebooted everything. The Teams just rebooted. Okay, coming back to the Bicep template, I'm going to start sharing. Somebody let me know if that works. Glenn, do you see it?
No, I see only myself. I think we lost about 20 seconds or 30 seconds or something.
Cool. Okay, but do
now
you
we
see my
see.
screen now?
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. So I was saying that you could increment these properties as and when you go. It's possible to do that. And also Bicep give you an output. This is very important because when we go and deploy number of Bicep templates, when they will deploy number of Bicep templates, the developers, they will be using the output to chain each one of those together. I'm going to show you how also. So right now I have virtual networks that I'm going to be using. The same thing here, all the templates. And one important part is that I do not leave the name to chance also. I make sure that the name is decided and not hard-coded. It's dynamic all the way. This gives you better governance because all things end up looking predictable in terms of tags, in terms of property, in terms of names. So you do not have randomness anymore on your estate. The pipeline here is only for producers. So right now what my pipeline does is a couple of variables here, which I used for the deployment. I make sure only the path that is changed for that particular asset triggers the deployment of my pipeline. And I go ahead and deploy this as a chain. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned the outputs. I'll show you how this works here. The first, I go ahead and lint the whole template just to check if there's a formatting issue or if there's something of an error here and there, just basic linting. The second, I'm trying to deploy a resource group. If you see, this is a standard Azure Resource Manager template section that could be used from Azure DevOps. I give it the scope, which would be subscription here because I'm trying to deploy a resource group. And basically, where's the template parameter file, if there is any, and some parameters that I wanted there. Now, notice I've not given values for most of the parameters. That's why we're trying to override whatever is not there. And this is very important. This one pipeline could be just for one project. So one project for one pipeline, they can declare all the criticality and confidentiality around the same project and deploy resources one after the other. So right now I'm deploying a resource group. Then after that, I go ahead and get the output for resource group. You see here, the resource group had an output value called resource name. And I'm going to show you here. The resource group had 3 output variables, and I'm going to be using one of them. And it's a good practice to always standardize what goes out. You have to make sure the ID and the name are at least going out because that's used very much. I'm going to be using name and value, and I'm going to store it in a new variable that would be created in runtime, the resource group scope name. Then I go ahead and use that and a service connection to make sure other resources are deployed here, which would right now be an application insight. After this deployment is successful, I check if the deployment is successful, then I go ahead and publish it. And this again is a standard script. You could just copy paste it if you need a standard script to go ahead and publish the compiled Bicep resource, which right now is working because I have a condition here, and set it into a container registry. How does this look like? This is the exciting bit here. Okay, let me just open it here. This is the container registry, and all I've done is mentioned it here, that it has to go ahead and take it to the container registry which has connection name here, module container registry under the module name and the module version. And if you notice, module version is coming from the meta file, and module name is coming from the folder. That's why we need to have an organization of folder structure, right? This goes ahead to container registry, and this is what makes your job a lot more easier, because right now you do not have to expose the whole template. All you have to do is to make sure people have access to this template container registry. Yeah. So if you notice here, the resource groups and the application insights and virtual network, they've all been here. And this is where your version control comes into picture. The first 2 version numbers are what you've defined, major, minor. And this is the runtime version, which is probably going to be your date. And how many times have you run on the same date? Very professional, if you ask me. People who use this, like you or the people, developers, they will need to have ACR pull and list access to make sure they can list your modules. That's for the developers who will be writing these modules. And listing is needed for the pipelines. If you notice here, ACR pull and ACR reader, I have two registries here, two AD groups that are being assigned this policy here, the permissions, sorry. Good. Let me take you to the pipeline that does this all. This here, consumer, and we have producer here. I have my I have a couple of resource groups, but nothing fancy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just try and deploy one of those things. Let's deploy a storage account. While this is happening, this would go ahead and create the resource and the resource group around it, like I mentioned in the pipeline files. But this is the labor that goes in. The fruits of these labor could be taken up by the consumers. The consumers are the people who will be using this module. So obviously they need to have permission and they need to have access. They do not need to have permission to push. They only need access to list and pull. That is just about it, right? What happens here is that they create a new file. For example, I have here another project. This is a totally different project because I'm trying to emulate a person who's not here, who's trying to consume it. So they will not have access to your project. They only have access to the container registry. Right now, this is another project. In another project, what I do is, let's say we are one of the teams, we create another folder for us. And what they do is they create a pipeline file similar to what we had before because they were trying to deploy Bicep files. So nothing fancy there. But the fancy part comes up in the resource Bicep files. If you notice here, the Bicep files here have a very small version of what we had before. They will start to use these in this way. They would go ahead and they would write module as a keyword, given a name to the module. So the module has a name now. You would be calling this while you refer to the outputs, like I've done here for the other modules. And then a URL that points to your container registry, the module, and the version of the module. So BR, because it's Bicep, this is just a keyword that has to be there. And the rest of the URL is basically your container registry URL, the module that you would be using, and the version number. If you remember, this is similar to this. There we go. That's the repository server name. So that's the first part. We go to the repository, we check out which resource do you want to deploy. That's a resource group here. So that here, this would be the second part of the URL, and the version that you want to use. That would be the third part of the URL. As long as you have that correct, when you do equal to and you do a space, it would give you the required features. Now, this is where the magic kicks in of what all labor you put in, right? The moment you do required features, it gives you what it needs for you to be deployed. Yeah. So this is very specific to the project. And this could be reutilized by multiple projects and into multiple environments. So I've not hard coded it, but I've given it a limitation. Now you remember the part where we gave certain limitations to the bicep file. Yeah, we only gave certain allowed values. You remember that? One of those allowed values is location, because I do not want people to be deploying beyond certain regions. Yes, there are policies. There are obviously policies that could do that, but getting into the this is where the rubber meets the road. I always wanted to say that, but never knew where where it goes. But this is where the rubber meets the road. In case you want to do this in a way that gives you more control and predictability from the get-go, not just from the policies, because there are some things that cannot be done by policies, but can be done from here. Yeah. And before Defender comes up with those exceptions, you could hard code this here. And this here, if you go ahead and highlight, put your cursor on the location, you will see my documentation and the allowed values are available here. And this here gives you an essence of what is allowed and what's not allowed. So in case somebody tries to deploy it, they don't even have to deploy it. In case I try to, let's say, just Norway. Yeah. I just do Norway and do not give anything else, it would come up and probably say that this is not allowed. It probably would. Yeah, but there's something like this would happen and it would not allow you to deploy. And there would be a clear message that these are the following values that are available, and this is what you have to do. The moment you do this, the documentation helps the other person. If you think about the consumer, it helps them immensely, because then they understand, why are you asking the location? Make sure these things are named aptly, and this documentation essentially helps them out. What values give what result? And these are the locations that are available. Why is that? And because this is all that there is, right? From the get-go, you have governance in hand. And from the get-go, you do not have liberty to create chaos. Yeah. So all they have to do is give these values. And these are required values, if you noticed. These are the values that they have to give. There are values beyond this that you could give for variables that are not assigned, that are not given any values. Yeah, if values are given, then these are parameters that are not required. These are optional parameters. For example, I could give a location or a project code that is always correct, right? A default value. If you do that, that's not a required value anymore. I would suggest against that, because then that makes your template very hard coded in a sense. If you think about it, that's not true governance. When you do this, what happens is that they have to give these values and they end up in a situation where they inevitably deploy something that is in line with the enterprise policies. And if you notice, this is not big. This is a very small template, but what it is deploying is this, which is around 200 lines. Yeah. We're deploying this in mere 15 lines. And that's a huge improvement over somebody knowing, trying to understand modules and Bicep and trying to devise everything. Right now, I don't even need the knowledge of what Bicep is. All I need to know is that these values are to be given. People understand key value pairs, and that's what there is, right? A very small learning curve on this one, a very small learning curve. I'm going to take a little bit pause here, see where the deployment went for the pipeline. Yeah, and something is published here. The first thing is we deployed storage account. So the storage account should now have a new version deployed to it. That should be for today. So if you notice 2024 14.3, that is deployed today. This is my first deployment for today, and it's still version 01. And that's how the updates happen as and when you push. So you can test and push a new version whenever that's needed, right? And of course, this would have led to, second, I'll just open a new one. This would have led to deployment of a new resource group that has a new storage account. And this is all controllable. You can have a separate subscription that is always used to test deployments. Yeah, demo. So there you go. That's all according to what you want. And as you want, if you see the tags here, they're deployed according to what you need, whatever I have deployed here. And it kind of has a reminder that this is being done in a proper way and not just freestyling there. Yeah, so that's one thing here. Coming back to what I was explaining. So now what I'm doing for the new project, for a supposed project here, is that I'm creating the resource groups here separately, and I'm creating other resources that would be using that resource group. Now, some of you might notice I could have done this in the same Bicep file, but I'm not doing that. And there's a very specific reason to this, because if you want to change scope in the same Bicep file, that's not supported yet. So a module, because right now after deploying the resource group, I'm going to change the scope to that resource group. I want to deploy the other resources to that particular resource group. That is not supported in the same Bicep file. So that's one of the reasons why I have to keep the resource groups separate in a separate Bicep file. But that's not a biggie, believe me, because if you have more files, I mean, not too many, hopefully, but two different files, it's easier to see what's going on, because even the smallest code, when accumulated over time, becomes big. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to do the same thing as I did with the resource group. Start with the module, hit enter, and get the tags that are needed, get the properties that are required, and I'm trying to deploy a security group, a virtual network, and a virtual network subnet. This is all the developers need to know. And it's possible to give them an example and they could just copy and paste like I did before. Yeah, it's possible to do that. I always give my developers sample code, as you can see here, with 2 or 3 different approaches how they can go about it. And it's possible to do that for every team. The pipeline file is also not as big as it was before. But if you notice, it has the same sections. It has a trigger in which it only triggers when something is being done for that particular project. So that's why the whole defined path here. I have a couple of variables. I have my own pool of machine that is being deployed and being run for. Yeah? So the Bicep template, the execution of the pipeline will happen on that machine. That's my machine. I have full control over it. Again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm deploying the resource group, which I did from in the previous pipeline file for producers. I am going ahead and getting a new runtime variable that has the value of the name of my resource groups. And then I'm using that to create another deployment that has a new deployment scope of a resource group instead of a subscription. Yeah? A resource group is deployed on a subscription, but resources are deployed in resource group. That's why the deployment scope changes. And that's one of the reasons why I had 2 different Bicep files there. Yeah. I go ahead and deploy the scope of resource group. And in that, I call upon the values of the template files. All of these are defined as variables up top here. So if you notice, the project name and the template from the root, the files are being named here. When you do that, you can give a custom deployment name too. I love that because then I can identify what's going on where and I can trace stuff. Yeah. Now it's important to note that the IntelliSense that was available for the Bicep file is not available for the YAML file. So it's important to put the right documentation and convey that if things are allowed in Bicep, then and then only the pipeline would succeed. If people give values that are not available in the documentation that popped up, that would also fail. The pipeline would also fail. There are no exceptions to this. Then we again override some parameters. And if you see this, these are written more legibly and more so. The reason is I wanted to demonstrate that this could be done in a clean way. So if you look at this one, not a very good feeling. But if you look at this one, it seems more comprehensible. Yeah, just look and feel of it. Now what happens is that if I go ahead and import this into Bicep, Azure DevOps, both of these repositories, first off, are in their respective folders. So the producer project had a repository for producer. The consumer repository has a repository for consumer. So if I go to the consumer and I try to create a new pipeline, it would ask me where you want it from. And I say, I want it from my own repository. And I go there, go select my project, existing one, and then I select whichever one is needed. And that's why it's important to give correct paths. Yeah. Because eventually you will have a number of pipelines and number of resources and number of projects. Maybe the consumers don't, but the producers would. And that's why it's important to name things correctly. When you import this, you end up with something like this. I always advise to arrange it in folders so that you know what is being given as an example and what is given as a team. Right? It's important to understand also that you need to understand how much do you want to break a resource. I could have, if you notice, I could have created the virtual network and subnet together. Yeah, that's possible. But I've created the subnet in a separate way, in a separate Bicep file. And it's important to understand why, because you might end up in a situation where people need to add more subnets in a virtual machine, or in a virtual network, sorry. So it's up to your wisdom of your environment to know how much to break certain resources into. It's basically the same file that I have demonstrated here, the same pipeline file. I'm going to just run it. Although the trigger is there and it could have automatically been run, I've just not committed something here because it might take some time to trigger it. I hope my machine is up. Yeah, it is up. Cool. If you notice, this is very streamlined because after you've done this, all you need to make sure is people do not have direct access to deploy things on their subscription. They have to. This only works when people deploy it only through pipelines. That's why the project needs to be convinced, and this probably needs to come from higher ups, that they abandon their resource deployment privileges and transfer them to their pipelines. This is very important. Now, each of those pipelines has a service account, service connection that takes them to their respective subscription here. It's possible to create that for your project too and for individual consumers for them too. If this only needs a basic understanding of DevOps, what's important to know is that this pipeline is running through a managed service principle. And that managed service principle also needs to have privileges on the container registry to make sure it can absorb the modules that you have given it that have been published there. Yeah. So this is the identity, and this is how you get it. Just make sure that it's available to take up the container registry and pull resources from it. As soon as this is done, we should probably see a new resource group there. Yeah, 2 more resource group popped up. And by default, they're deploying their own stuff in a proper way. If you know the sequence and everything is decided by the project, we give them liberty for that. But the rest of the name is decided by the parameters that they've given. Yeah. So if they need it to be developed for Norway East, the code that they get is for NOE. You can define your parameters, you can define your naming conventions here so that there is predictability. And if you notice here, tags are in place. the a very common thing is that you need certain, you do not need an overkill of IP addresses, right? So that's why you make sure you give them proper sequences that are available there. A lot of control if you think about it. Everything has a default security group, always assigned, default properties in the security group, always assigned from the get-go. This is control. This is how eventually your estate should look like, where people only deploy through pipelines. And these pipelines developers have been using for very long. And that's why it's possible to just put one more step, that's this step of deployment, in the section, and they could have all of this together from the get-go and fully automated. Yeah. Oh, and that brings me to the end of my demonstration. A couple of resources though. All of this that I've given here, all of these, both of these repositories are available online also. I'll share the link. And God, I hate this sometimes. Okay, cool. Yeah, so these repositories are available here. It's possible to learn more about Bicep through very extensive tutorials from Microsoft Learn. They have various levels. Fundamentals, immediate and advanced. I would say start with immediate. Fundamentals is too fundamental to go with. Yeah. And yeah, that is basically it. I'll paste the resources here and you could look into it. I've written an article that details about this also. And that's also available in the link. Now,
I think we maybe should upload it to our GitHub
Yes.
repo as well.
We could do that. We'll do that. Thanks, Glenn. Any questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
People probably are hungry and they want to run for dinner now.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And well, if you do not have any questions, I would say thank you for joining. Now, because this session is to know about each other, this user group is to know people from your community. We've created a group on LinkedIn, especially I'm sorry, I'm missing the word here, but the point is for professionally connecting with the people who are into the same governance scenarios, right? Please try and connect there. And if you have something exciting that you are very passionate about in governance, feel free to submit a session and we'll love to welcome you on this. Yeah. All our recordings.
We can talk a bit about what's happening next time as well.
Yeah.
Because next time in our third meetup, we will have a guest speaker from Microsoft, and we will talking about the insider risk within Eureview, which is highly actual now in these co-pilot days. So yeah,
it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. That's super cool. Yeah. So please make sure you join us next time too. All the recordings, in case you've missed, are available at our YouTube page, and the link is in the meeting. So I think we have 10 minutes to spare. If you do not have any questions, I will leave you with 10 minutes and hope to see you again next time. Thanks, Greg.
Bye.
Thanks, Glenn.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.